Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's an honor to be with you again this week. This will be our last whiteboard session. We're going to hopefully, I think, start the book of Isaiah next week. But for now, we're going to talk about courage. And we're going to talk about the courage of Peter. And we're going to look at the story of his denial of Jesus in the courtyard of the high priest a little differently today. And then talk about how it applies to us. So we begin in Mark 14, verses 66 through 72. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Now, Peter gets a lot of flack for this. He gets hammered for this, doesn't he? We look at Peter as a man of recklessness. He says things driven by emotion, doesn't really stop to think what he's about to say. Even in The Chosen, he's got a little bit of this edge to him, this little bit of hot-headedness. And that's just how we see him sometimes. But we need to look at this differently. Now, on the night Jesus was betrayed, if you remember the story, what does Peter do? Does he, when the mob comes to arrest Jesus, Judas kisses him on the cheek, betrays him, what does Peter do? He doesn't flee. He draws his sword, cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. It looks like he's ready to take on the whole mob. That's not cowardice. Maybe a little crazy, but there's courage in that. And yeah, he's chastised by Jesus, right? Those who live by the sword shall die by the sword. But he shows his intention here. His intention to stand with Jesus. And then what does he do after this? Now, common sense and self-preservation would say, okay, lay low, find a place to kind of hide out, wait and see how all this plays out, and then figure out what you're going to do. Right? That's the course most of us would have chosen. Just hang tight. Let's get a feel for what's going on here and see if we can find out a little bit more information, then make some decisions. Self-preservation would also say, don't go to the high priest's house. You just attacked one of his servants. Don't go there. That's the last place you want to go. But that's exactly where Peter goes, right? It's just the sheer audacity of that. But he sticks to his word. He's going to stand by his rabbi as he said he would. And now in the courtyard, we see this conflict start to happen. This desire to stick by Jesus, but this also inner fight or flight kind of thing. This, self-preservation mode kind of kicks in. And he's sitting by the fire. Somebody recognizes him, calls him out. And straight away, he denies being connected with Jesus at all. But here's the key piece. Again, he doesn't leave. He stays. Now again, okay, if it's me, all right, I've cut off the high priest servant's ear here. I'm going to be recognized. They're going to know who I am. I've called all this attention to myself. I'm not going to go to the high priest's house. Well, okay, I go anyway. And now somebody's recognized me. At that point, most of us are going, all right, I'm out of here. It's just way too much danger here. I'm hightailing it out of here. But he doesn't. He stays. And then it happens again. And he denies it again. But he stays again. He doesn't go. And then when it happens the third time, he denies it again the third time, vehemently, right? Calling curses down on himself. But he doesn't curse Jesus. He calls curses down upon himself if he's not telling the truth. But then it happens. He hears the cock crow the second time. Now, Barclay has an interesting take on this. I don't know that I agree with it, but it's interesting nonetheless, because again, it's taking things back into that setting of that night. Now, Barclay explains that the Roman night was broken up into 4 watches between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. And at the end of each watch, a bugle call would be sounded to signify or signal the change. Now, the name for that bugle call is called a galcinium, which is Latin for cockcrow. So Barclay surmises that when Peter denies him, he hears it once, and then maybe it's 3 hours later or so, till the third accusation comes, and he hears the change of the guard at maybe 3 a.m., 3 in the morning, and that's what Peter hears. It's interesting, possible, but regardless, now Bible says it's a rooster, so I'm going to lean with God's words on this, but regardless, right? Regardless of whether it was a bugle or a rooster, Peter remembers what Jesus tells him, right? Told him back at the Passover meal, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me. And so Peter remembers that, and his heart breaks. Now, yes, Peter did succumb to temptation. Who of us in this situation wouldn't have? In fact, most of us will never find ourselves in this type of situation. It's a circumstance that most of us, if not all of us, will never face. And every person has a breaking point, and this was Peter's. For us, most of our breaking points, and in fact, most of the disciples' breaking points, was back in the garden, back at Gethsemane, where they fled. That would have been ours as well, back at the garden. Most of us would have fled as well. But see, Peter's courage doesn't stop here. If you research the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, most theologians, most educators will tell you, and they all agree, most of them agree, that yes, Mark did write this, but it was probably most likely dictated to him by Peter. So for all intents and purposes, this is the gospel according to Peter. And if that is the case, then the story here had to come from Peter. He must have told Mark this, and most likely he used this as an illustration to other people as well. Right? This is what I did, he says. I did this. I denied him, just as he said I would. But you know what? He didn't turn his back on me. He forgave me, and he loved me. And that's powerful. And it takes courage because there's a lot at stake. Reputation. Peter, when you look at Acts, Peter's one of the guys, one of the leaders. And even just going through the Gospels, he's kind of the lead disciple. When Jesus asks, "Who do the people say I am?" he's the one who answers, "You're the Christ." So Peter's the guy. So he's got a lot riding on this. But this type of story and this type of courage is the type of story and the type of courage that makes a difference, or can make the difference in the life of someone, because it's hugely poignant. It tells of a personal experience. And it shows, and Peter can say, look, all this stuff that we've been telling you is true, and here's my experience. Here's how I lived it. Here's what happens. Here's what happened when I gave in to temptation to preserve myself. I denied my Lord, my Rabbi. Anybody else would have turned his back on me. He didn't. He forgave me, and he still loves me. So, do we have the courage to tell our stories of failure, right? To show others how Jesus picked us up out of the mud pits and cleaned us off and loved us and forgave us and sent us on our way. Changed us for the better. Because if we want to bring people to Christ, it's those stories that are going to make the difference. We can relate all the other things in the Gospels and all the other stories of the Bibles and all the other stories that we've heard about, and they may have an impact, but not to the extent that our own story will. Because they impacted us. And people will see that for us, it matters. It mattered then, and it matters now. But as I said about Peter, it takes great courage for us to do so, because there's risk, there's reputation, there's standing, there's maybe something we've kept inside that even our families don't know about. Possible. And so you risk all that by, maybe you risk all that by speaking of something that's happened on this level. But if we're brought to a place where we can bring someone to salvation, win a soul for Christ, shouldn't that make the difference? Right? Now, we don't just broadcast these things haphazardly, because it can cause pain and it can cause hurt depending on what it is. But if God brings us to a moment in time to share with somebody something of this deep impacting moment in our lives where Christ made the difference, do we have the courage to share that story? Will we have the courage to share that story? Because in the end, someone's life, someone's eternal life may depend on it.